All right, so we are fresh off of a 12-hour gaming session of the Marathon Alpha, and overall, I think I'm actually really happy with the current state of the game and the direction that Bungie decided to take Marathon in the extraction shooter genre. I know this game won't be for everyone, as it's, really not meant to be, as extraction shooters are much more, of like a heavy investment, serious, more hardcore type of game, but maybe also won't appeal to the super hardcore military sim audience that is famous with Escape from Tarkov. So to me, this is the perfect blend of games that I personally love. I have thousands of hours in Destiny, I have thousands of hours in Apex, and I have over 500 hours in Escape from Tarkov, and I feel like Marathon is the perfect blend of all of them, but not without its flaws. So today we'll be covering 7 pros and 7 cons, the perfect Bungie number 7, kind of discussing what is working well with the alpha and what could use some improvement as they work towards a beta and ultimately the launch this September. So if you enjoyed today's video, a like, subscription, commenting, sharing, all of those things help the channel grow, and we will be covering a ton of Marathon content along with Destiny 2 content here on the channel moving forward. So without further ado, let's dive into it. So first up, we're going to start with the pros. These are easier to cover because they're a bit shorter, and it's kind of what's working well with the game, right? They're not as in-depth as some of the cons where we kind of have to explain why certain things aren't working as well as we would hope them to. All right, so diving into our list of pros, the first one is the runners actually feel really well balanced. This is something I definitely wasn't expecting. I was kind of worried with, the ability to choose 3 of the same runner that you'd run into a meta, and we may actually get into that point where everybody's using the same runner at all times, or it feels like you're at a huge disadvantage if you're not running a specific runner. But honestly, during the alpha so far, I haven't really felt that way. I think there are a couple outliers that I'll be covering in the cons where tweaking certain abilities will make specific runners, looking at you, Blackbird, slightly more balanced, and will also help bring up certain underperforming runners, which I'll be talking about later in the video. Number 2, gunplay is primary and abilities are secondary. This is basically what we've always prayed for from the Destiny PvP sandbox. I think some abilities are great. It helps differentiate you from military simulator type games like Escape from Tarkov and, other shooters that just feel somewhat bland. But I think they actually do a really good job of giving really powerful abilities very long cooldowns so that they're not dominating every single engagement. If you use your ability at the wrong time, you're not going to have it up for the next engagement, especially if multiple squads are rolling into you and you're having to deal with, 2 or 3 squads at any given time. You're not going to always have Blackbird scan. You're not always going to have your void camouflage available, right? There are elements of your gameplay that are going to rely much more on your primary gunplay and much less on your abilities. And so team comp and having counters between each of the runners is also really important. Like, for example, Blackbird is a hard counter to Void, but Void without, a Blackbird on the other team can really wreck an entire team comp and take you completely off guard. So I think there's really good positives and negatives to each runner. And, depending on which map you're going to, I think others are gonna excel more than others. So, number 3, the gameplay feels really good to me. It lives up to that typical Bungie FPS standard, in my opinion. The recoil feels good. I know some people were complaining about, I guess, like, mouse stickiness or, like, aim assist, I guess, on M&K. I felt it a little bit. I do feel like it's a little bit forgiving, but it feels really good overall. I feel like the gunplay is in a really solid spot. And that leads me into my second point about the gunplay, and this will definitely have mixed opinions, but I feel like the TTK, the time to kill, is also in a very, very good place. It's not too long, it's not too short, and you have to keep in mind in games like this where there are so many different angles, there's so many different rat spots, there's people extract camping. Having a super short TTK is actually really bad for games like this because you want to have the ability to react to getting shot in the back or from an angle you're not expecting. If the TTK is too short, you don't have the ability to counterplay, get behind cover, use any of your abilities to try and escape these dangerous situations. So longer TTKs in games like this is actually good. In Escape from Tarkov, you know, you can have a scav that literally one taps you to the head and you're like, okay, well, my raid's just over for 40 minutes. Versus this, I feel like the AI is relatively aggressive. They're not overly OP, but if you're careless with your positioning, you can definitely get punished. So I feel like this leads well into our next point, which I actually feel like the game flow of looting and PvP as well as engaging with PvE combatants is pretty well balanced right now. I don't feel like it's overly PvP heavy. I don't feel like I go through massive stints where I'm never getting into engagements. If you're seeking out PvP and you're chasing down gunfire, you're definitely going to find some fights. But if you want to loot up and try and complete your quests, you're also going to be able to do that. But you also will have some squads roll up on you from time to time. So I feel like there's actually a surprisingly good game flow right now for the game being in an alpha state. I feel like they've taken a lot of thought and care into this and kind of how the game operates already as a whole. It feels like it's in a really good spot. And I think one of the most controversial points, which also feeds into game flow, is the heat meter. I am actually a massive fan of this, and I may get roasted for this down in the comments, but hear me out. I feel like the heat meter is vital to preventing frequent third parties that people are so annoyed with in games like Apex Legends. When you have a heat meter, you can't just constantly sprint or use movement abilities to cross the map incredibly quickly and chase down gunfire and kind of ego all of your quests, and you know, you just go monkey brain and sprint straight at the enemy gunfire. Having a heat meter, you know, kind of gives players a bit of time to clear out some of the PvE enemies, some of the UESC, mini bosses and things like that, and then have time to reposition smartly so that they're not just immediately being chased down by 2 or 3 teams. So heat meter is good. Could it use a little bit of an adjustment? Maybe, sure. But I actually feel like as long as you're managing it well, it's not that big of an issue. And maybe if you're running into constant overheating, it's a bit of a skill issue. So I don't know what to tell you. Number 5, auto selling loot is a wonderful thing for reducing the inventory simulator allegations that Escape from Tarkov has constantly battled. Some people like the inventory gaming where you're kind of min-maxing what's in your stash. I think a lot of it is very monotonous, and the fact that they will auto sell things to the specific vendors to help you build reputation is actually a great thing for this game. You keep what matters. You keep things that are going to impact traders that you need to trade in or use for currency, for different barters, or to rank up different quests. It will keep those items, but anything that's purely monetary, they get rid of for you, which I think is a fantastic idea and helps really speed up the gameplay and gets you back into raids faster. Number 6, the down but not out system is so good for games like this. Like I said, in Escape from Tarkov, where you randomly get one-tapped by an enemy you never saw, or you get head-eyed by a scav who happened to just turn and one-tap you, and then you're spectating your friends in a raid for 40 minutes without the ability to get back into the action, kind of feels bad. You spend most of your time, you know, or like half of your time spectating your friends because you got into some unlucky scenario where you got shot by an enemy in the gajillion angles in a specific map, right? It also helps prevent against extract campers or people just sitting in bushes on tops of mountains with snipers, right? Like if they get a pick, yeah, they might down you. But maybe you can crawl behind cover and get revived by a teammate. And even if they do happen to finish you off, guess what? Your teammates can spend even longer reviving you, but because these people are sitting up in the mountains or ratting in a certain spot, like far away from an extract or whatever, they're not going to be able to capitalize on it. So I actually feel like the down but not out system kind of integrates the best part of Apex, which is putting pressure and tension on PvP engagements and forcing you to kind of push and engage the enemy once you've actually downed one of the enemy players. I think that's actually a great part of it, but it still leaves hero moments where you can 1v3 a team and then revive your dead teammates. I think it's actually an awesome system. People are probably going to feel differently about this, but I think it adds to the game in a really positive way. And number 7, I think the alpha is a good teaser without spoiling the experience for the wider community. We're not seeing any of the community puzzles. We're getting small, like map puzzles and loot puzzles and things like that, but nothing major where, people are going to have the FOMO of missing out on these like huge community experiences. I think they're being very intentional about what they're revealing right now, and I think that's really smart. They're giving you enough to kind of bite into without completely ruining the experience for people who don't have an alpha key, which I totally sympathize with. All right, now we're going to dive into our cons, and we have 7 of them, just like we have for our pros list. Again, these are going to be slightly longer because we do need to elaborate on what's not working here. So number 1, I feel like loot is the primary issue at the moment. I don't feel like there's enough high value loot items just kind of naturally laying around the map. I feel like most loot is locked either behind crates or in crates or behind locked doors or behind some sort of interactable. It doesn't seem like there's enough loot around, and that there's not enough like, oh, I found this high value item, I need to extract. I don't feel like there's that sense of urgency where, I find a LEDX or a GPU in Tarkov, which are like hyper expensive items, right? They're account changing, where you find them and all of a sudden you can buy crazy kits, or you advance a crazy difficult quest line that unlocks some sort of crazy barter for you later on. Like, I don't feel like there's enough of those moments right now. And I would like to see more urgency behind the value of the loot itself. Even just the, finding gold items. I played for 12 hours today. I didn't even see a single gold item on the entire map. Legendary, I don't know if that's what they call it, but the gold tier rarity, I didn't see a single one. I saw a handful of purples, but often most of them didn't really apply to the guns that I was using. They were like attachments for a machine gun or like a stock for a sniper that like I didn't even own. So they kind of felt like, I'd just bring them back and sell them for money. Because you're so limited on stash space too. Like, I'm not going to be hoarding components for weapons I'm not even using or have in my stash at the moment. So that's kind of a bit of feedback. And this kind of goes along the same vein, but number 2 is predetermined loot rarity. I'm actually not sure how I feel about it, because it's almost like Bungie is telling you that you shouldn't care about 60% of the loot in the game because it's white, green, or blue rarity. And I kind of feel like with how rare the other items are, a lot of it ends up just seeming like very lackluster or monotonous, very samey. It becomes really hard to distinguish what makes different pieces of loot important. So I think maybe adding markers for like quest items, or having like an identifier for specific materials that help you with crafts, or some sort of marker or identification that kind of diversify the loot a little bit would be really positive. I'm sure the loot rarity thing is a lot harder to change, but maybe there's a few things we can tweak there to help make that overall system feel a bit better. Number 3, weapons feel good, but I don't feel like they have much personality to them. I don't know if I could really name a weapon that I used today where I was like, damn, that is my favorite weapon by far, because a lot of them feel sort of similar. And I think part of that comes down to, again, like the loot and player agency over customizing your weapon isn't quite there, which results in a lot of them feeling relatively the same. I used the base AR a lot. I thought it was decent. I used some of the SMGs. I thought they were decent. The sniper seems pretty OP. I will say we might have to tune the sniper back just a tad. It's definitely going to be a sniper meta for now. But I would love the ability to upgrade and personalize attachments more frequently. It seems like we don't get the opportunity to do that nearly as much early on. And even if it's done at a lesser degree, having more sights, more stocks, more skins, like, I don't know, something to give the player agency and personality in a game like this, where a lot of, the runners are identical. There's not a lot to kind of identify you as a player, would be a really positive addition. Number 4, early quests are very samey. There's a lot of go here, scan this, scan that, do this, then extract. I'm sure there's more variants further into the game, but the alpha doesn't do questing justice right now, in my opinion. And I'm sure this changes later on, you know, when we get into quests on more difficult maps, or, you know, we really advance the quest lines, but they're not doing themselves any favors selling Marathon as an interesting questing type of game when so many of the quests are very similar to each other early on in the alpha. Number 5. I would love to hold more than one contract at a time across vendors. I know this probably goes against, you know, the lore of the game or whatever, but maybe early on we can make exceptions where, like, if you're collecting certain materials in a specific area and then you need to do exactly the same thing for a different faction, it makes it feel very repetitive again. So maybe, you know, early quests you can pick up 2 to 3 at a time, and sort of min-max how you go about completing all of those quests in a single raid. I think having an efficiency factor or skill gap in how you quest and how quickly you're able to do things adds to the depth and the player expression that we talked about earlier, and kind of gives players the ability to, you know, be more efficient with their time. Again, it adds tension because you're trying to complete multiple quests in a single raid, and if you don't get out alive, you know, maybe it sets you back a few steps. Which also brings me to a side point with this. I also feel like there needs to be, and this is probably a very unpopular opinion, there needs to be more quests that require you to survive by extracting. It doesn't feel like there's enough weight behind your decisions that you're making, because right now I can instantly run to my objective, scan 2 items, and then sprint at a team when I hear gunfire and engage in PvP. I don't have to be cognizant of trying to survive once I've scanned an item because I don't need to live, so I can just go about doing whatever. There's no risk reward to my actions. You know, yeah, I might find some extra loot by taking out a team, but I don't have to weigh the decision of, do I chase down that gunfire at the hopes of getting extra loot, or do I get out with my quest completed? I think you need more of those high tension decisions that make these games great. Number 6, outlier abilities. And right now I feel like there are 2 primary offenders. The first one, and this may come as a surprise to some of you guys, but I actually feel like Glitch is slightly undertuned at the moment. I feel like she consumes far too much heat to be a movement character with the primary goal of disruption relative to other characters who have the same heat consumption. For example, you can use the enhanced slide and then double jump, and it pretty much consumes your entire heat meter. I can't use these abilities to get in and out of cover and then sprint away and reposition myself, which is kind of the whole point of her kit. You don't keep any momentum coming out of a slide, and, you know, you don't really get that much extra distance with her compared to other runners to be that sort of disruptor that the power fantasy is alluding to. So I think either like a 25% reduction in her heat cost, or being able to maintain momentum out of a slide, kind of similar to how Locust does with his dash. Like, he actually can get from cover to cover almost more efficiently than Glitch, who is supposed to be the movement character. But then, you know, Locust obviously comes with defensive benefits as well, as more of a tanky runner. So I'd like to see her adjusted just a little bit. As for Overtuned, I actually feel like most abilities are pretty well balanced. I think the only outlier might be Blackbird's like UAV ultimate ability, where it pings enemies through walls multiple times. Maybe reducing the number of pings down from like 7 to 5 would be a good balance. I think the fact that it pings through walls and isn't full-on blown wall hacks is a really good way to approach this ability, and it has a massive cooldown. So I think either, if you don't want to touch the efficiency of the ability, maybe make the cooldown even longer, or potentially reduce the number of pings, or notify the enemy team that they've been pinged by an enemy Blackbird. I think this would go a long way in helping players kind of be more aware and have their guard up that they're going to be engaged by a Blackbird once they've actually been pinged by the enemy team. So just a few ideas. I don't want to buff or nerf too many things. I actually feel like most of the runners are in a really good spot. But yeah, those are my initial thoughts. And last but not least, at number 7, I want stats. Player stats are so important in games like this. It keeps you invested outside of raids to keep chasing bigger number better. And I think the lack of stats right now, which is probably just an alpha thing because they have alluded to leaderboards already, but having a lack of stats and post-action reports, your overall PvP versus PvE KD, your overall KDA, survival rate, damage absorbed by Locust, or time invisible with Void, enemies pinged by Blackbird, or enemies dazed with Glitch are so good for overall player engagement and sort of personality in a game where a lot of the runner skins are the same. A lot of the loot that you find is the same. So giving a sense of personality and uniqueness to your account and your runner is really important in my opinion. I think stats help reflect that. So overall, final thoughts. I think the alpha gets a solid 8.5 out of 10 for me. I actually think it's in a really solid spot, much better than I was expecting, to be honest. I was expecting it to be good, but I literally just want to get back on stream and play it more. So overall, final thoughts, great gunplay, solid balance and game flow. I don't mind the heat system whatsoever. It seems relatively forgiving and honestly helps prevent third partying, which I think helps balance the game better. I think some sort of movement limiting factors are good in games like this to help prevent constant third parties. Most of the issues seem relatively surface level and should be quite fixable with some minor adjustments. So I think that's super positive. And yeah, I'm really excited to see what you guys think down in the comments below. But hopefully you guys found this video helpful. I hope you guys enjoyed this format of video, and if you did, again, a like, subscription, commenting, sharing always helps the channel grow, as we'll be covering Marathon more in the future. Anyways, guys, thank you all so very much for watching. I really appreciate it, and we'll catch you in the next one. Peace.